Hello and welcome to a talk about the death of the digital divide. By the end of this presentation, I hope to have convinced you to move on from ideas of the digital divide and instead focus on a much bigger problem that's lurking right around the corner. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning. My name is Nicholas Napp and I'm the CEO of Xmark Labs. I've spent most of my career working on leading-edge technology, and currently I'm doing a lot of work with the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers and their Future Directions initiative. Now, because of the way humans perceive the world, we tend to think of things happening in a certain way, and that's not always true. And in the case of technology, technology isn't changing in the way that you think it is. Back in 2001, a gentleman called Ray Kurzweil wrote an essay called The Law of Accelerating Returns. Now, Kurzweil is a noted inventor and has created a number of things that many of us use on a daily basis. But in this essay, he looks specifically at the development of technology, and he points out that we see it as a linear thing where one thing happens after another. But in truth, it's actually exponential. It grows exponentially. And he goes on to analyze the current rate of technology advancement and concludes that in this century, we will see 20,000 years worth of technology development, the equivalent of 20,000 years by the year 2100. Now, that's a pretty shocking claim. And when you think about it, if you go back 20,000 years, the cutting edge of technology was a sharpened rock. That was the late Stone Age. And the idea that we could make as big of a leap as from the Stone Age to today within the next 80 years is frankly disturbing. There's a blogger that I like called Tim Urban, and Tim has written a number of online essays that really dissect complex problems and present them in a very understandable way. And Tim makes the point in one of his discussions of artificial intelligence that when you are close to a very, very steep curve, if you zoom in close enough, even the steepest of curves actually looks like a straight line. And that's the challenge that we have, is we struggle to perceive how rapidly technology is changing because we're living with it on a day-to-day basis. Now, Tim goes on to propose a thought experiment, and I won't give all the details, but I'll summarize it here. Basically, what he suggests is that we build a time machine, we go back to 1750, just before the Industrial Revolution, we kidnap somebody for fun and bring them to the modern day. And of course, their mind is blown. They're shocked by everything they see. Much of it seems like magic, and they recognize almost nothing. But Tim goes further in his thought experiment and suggests that the person that we kidnapped, thoroughly upset by what we've done, goes back to 1500, so 250 years before them, grabs somebody out of a local field, pulls them back to 1750, expecting the same result. But of course, the technological gap between 1500 and 1750 AD is not nearly as big as the divide between 1750 and today. And so the person that's brought to 1750 looks around and sees almost nothing new. Now, the point of this is to rather eloquently demonstrate how the rate of technology development is accelerating. And of course, there is a compounding effect over time, and this is something that we're going to come back to many times in this presentation, because one discovery typically begets another, often more than one. And so a single idea or a single invention can be the parent of many, many, many future ideas and inventions. And it doesn't matter if it's a major invention like the transistor that spawns multiple billion-dollar industries, or a relatively mild evolution like going from a regular phone to a smartphone. There wasn't that much that was new technologically in a smartphone, but it had amazing knock-on effects. Once the smartphone became popular, the components that it used dropped in price fantastically, and that enabled whole new industries such as consumer drones. The cost of building a drone used to be prohibitive for anybody except the military and the government, and now you can buy a children's toy for $30. And that is a direct result of the impact of the smartphone, which was a fairly minor iteration in terms of technological development. Now, this is a pretty bold claim, 20,000 years of development in just 100 years, and I think any bold claim should be supported by some evidence. So here are a couple of things to think about. First of all, we are drowning in complexity. In every field of human endeavor, if you look over the past 2 decades, you will see a massive increase in the level of complexity within that field. And to cite one example, I'm going to pick on an industry that's not known for being a technological group, and that would be the toy industry. Back in 1999, one of the toys of the year was this Hot Wheels car. It consists of metal, spray paint, and plastic. It's a very, very straightforward toy. But now fast forward to last year, and the toy of the year was Hot Wheels ID. Now this is still a toy car, but it is jam-packed with enough electronics that first of all, it can report its speed, it can track the tricks that it does, and it can record which races it's won. And it conveys all of that using radio frequencies tied to a nearby smartphone. And the child gets a smartphone app that allows them to track all of this data and share it. Now that is a massive increase in complexity. We've gone from metal, paint and plastic to having to worry about circuit boards, electronics design, radio frequency, building the software to drive those electronics, the software for the companion app, the user experience design for the companion app, and all of the supporting web services that make the thing work. It's an extraordinary leap and an extraordinary increase in complexity. Now, the second point, I would argue, is that we are drowning in data. When you look at the statistics, every 2 years we produce 90% of all the data that exists in the world. 90% every 2 years. And when you actually look at it, there's a great site out there called internetlivestats.com that will show you some of these things in real time. And in every second on the internet, nearly 3 million emails are being sent. 84,000 YouTube videos, 83,000 Google searches, and so on. The volume of data that we are creating and exchanging every second of every day is frankly mind-blowing. Now, if this claim is correct, and if we're drowning in data and complexity, what are the implications? Well, think about it this way. If data and complexity and the development of technology are a broad sort of proxy for the overall knowledge of the human race, it is very clear that our knowledge is growing exponentially. But now we as individuals have a fixed capacity for learning. We can learn only so much, or at least at only so much of a rate. Even the brightest among us doesn't learn exponentially. And so therefore, there's a gap. We all recognize that. There's a gap today between the things we know and the things we don't know. But the point is, at some point, when you have exponential growth in the amount of knowledge, that gap could become insurmountable. Or to put it another way, every year there is more and more that we all individually know less and less about. Now, that also, of course, leads to falling behind faster. Because if the development of technology is accelerating, it is easier than ever to fall behind. And not only is it easier, but you're going to fall behind further, faster. If you think of standing on the side of a roadway and a car drives past you at a constant speed, and then compare that to a car that is accelerating away from you, it's very clear that the car that's accelerating is going to leave you behind faster. And what I'm saying here is that the gap between the technology adopters and the laggards is going to grow exponentially. Now, how long will this take? It's not entirely clear. But what will the effects be is actually much easier to talk about because we have some historical data that we can look at. Now, the data that I'm going to show here is largely from the US, but it's broadly seen to be true worldwide. And teenagers that have access to home computing and home internet access are 6 to 8% more likely to graduate from high school. Not only that, but those that have internet access at home while they're students are likely to earn $2 million more over their lifetimes in their careers. There was a study done in 2009 that showed that internet access brought $32 billion in net consumer benefits and an average savings of $11,000 a year per household. And what's more, when you look at the job market, 82% of middle-skill jobs, not high-skill jobs, middle-skill jobs, now require digital skills. But there is an interesting precedent in US history that allows us to see the impact of this over a much longer time frame, and that is the GI Bill. Now, the GI Bill was something that the US Congress passed in order to help veterans from the Second World War, and it was a pretty massive stimulus package that allowed about 8 million veterans to go to college. It helped support them in retraining, learning about new technology, and improving their education. The GI Bill is largely credited with the emergence of the middle class in the US. And for those that were able to take advantage of it, there was a multi-generational impact because they accumulated more wealth, they passed that on to their descendants. So you see a corresponding uptick in things like college attendance and socioeconomic status for their descendants. Now, what many people don't know, both inside the US and outside, is that the GI Bill was implemented on a state-by-state level. And unfortunately, in 1940s and 1950s America, that meant that most black and minority veterans were completely excluded. And there's considerable evidence to argue that that created the foundation for the current socioeconomic gap in the United States. And of course, just as the positives accrue over time, the negatives accrue over time. And so you see less ability to send their children to college, and so it compounds over time. And unfortunately, that's not the end of the bad news here, because it's very clear that technology adoption favors those that are already advantaged. You need the infrastructure and the disposable income to take advantage of new technology. If you gave someone a brand new 5G phone and they live in a part of the world where there's no 5G reception, it's useless to them. And so lagging behind is exacerbated. And of course, both factors compound over time. But unfortunately, there is still more. There's something that we're missing in this discussion, and this really comes to the heart of what I want to convey today. I believe that the digital divide as a term is no longer relevant, and it's simply because our problem is bigger. It is about the technology divide, and the digital divide is just a tiny piece of that overall problem. So what do I mean by the technology divide? Well, we've talked about how technology is increasing exponentially, but as it increases, so does its breadth. The range of topics that technology touches and impacts is getting broader exponentially as well. And so when we think about the digital divide, we're normally thinking about computers and smartphones and internet access. And some of the latest buzzwords like robotics and wearables and quantum computing sort of fit into that paradigm. But there's an awful lot that doesn't. For example, in the world of implantable devices, we have ideas, we have products today like pacemakers and cochlear implants, but there are clinical trials going on for things like in vivo body sensors that can track your blood sugar levels, hormone levels, and other such things. We have brain-computer interfaces that are starting to allow people to control prosthetics just with their mind. There is advanced research that is looking at the possibility of directly controlling your computer, all with a brain-computer interface. These technologies are coming. And then beyond implantable devices, you've got the impact of genetics and gene editing. Already, wealthier parents can afford genetic screening for their unborn child. We've seen things being done with CRISPR, and there's many other technologies coming down the pipe, and all of these have a dramatic impact. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on pharmaceuticals and the developments happening there. There are drugs being trialed and being tested that do things like enhance cognitive function and appear to delay the effects of aging. And all of these technologies are more likely to be available to those that can afford them and have the infrastructure to take advantage of them. And these are just the things that we foresee. And of course, there are always twists and turns in technology development that we can't easily foresee. And there's always the people on the edge of society that are the either innovators or sometimes the people that are discarded as being, on the fringe of society. I've included a link at the bottom of the page here that reviews some developments in biohacking. And I should warn you, some of the images are a bit graphic. But keep in mind that in the history of tech, some of the garage inventors that seemed, out of their minds, frankly, are the ones that became successful. So imagine this. Imagine two people that are basically comparable in every way, shape, or form, but one of them has access to a brain-computer interface that gives them instant access to anything on the internet, any topic, anytime, with just a thought. The other person doesn't have this technology. Which one's going to be more effective in their job? Which one has to work harder just to keep up? Which one is going to get to invest in more technology and more support systems over time that elevate their status further? It's very clear that the technological advantage compounds over time, as does the disadvantage. So, where do we go from here? Well, first of all, we need to stop focusing on just the digital divide. We need to look at the broader technology divide, and that should concern us all. We need to focus on its compounding effects over time and how we address that, and the fact that it typically is going to target excluded and underrepresented populations. I truly believe that humanity is at a turning point. This century is going to see more change than we've seen ever in our history as a race, and it's going to dwarf the impact of the Industrial Revolution. And those that are ahead are going to get ahead further, and they're going to get ahead faster. And conversely, those that are left behind will fall behind further and faster. And like climate change and the global pandemic that we're all dealing with, the technology divide requires unprecedented coordinated action. We have to start a meaningful conversation about this. If we fail to do so, you're looking at a gap between rich and poor that will be unfathomably magnified over what we see today. And the time to start talking about it is now. I hope you found this talk thought-provoking, and I'd like to thank Dr. Inkster for asking me to speak. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for your time.